Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you so much for stopping by. I will admit I'm a little low energy this evening. We have the headphones on because we got some videos coming up. Headphones that disconnected when I started Ecamm Live and just now got them reconnected. Anyway. Yeah, so happy President's Day, everyone. It is President's Day. We used to celebrate Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday, and they were both in February. So we said, well, let's be efficient. Let's mush those together and have one holiday on the third Monday of February. So a lot of people have been off work today. Government's closed today. No postal mail today. All this type of thing. I will admit I took the opportunity to catch up on a bunch of stuff on the business side of things and to get some rest and relaxation. People kind of forget I'm a one-man show for now. I have an editor that edits some of my interviews and things like that, but everything else I do myself. And I also work for Suit Media as part of the Cameron Journal and everything, and so I'm running my basically two media companies at once. I book 2 shows for myself. I book shows for 3 to 4 other people, depending. I have help with some of the stuff on the soup side, of course, because we have staff over there and everything. But I'm still a one-man show, which is why sometimes I roll in here and I'm kind of like, oh boy, long day. Because usually my day starts about 8:30 in the morning when I wake up. And so I usually work a full day and then do the news hour in the evening. So Mondays are always a very full day, and sometimes I have recordings before this, and that was not the case today because Calendly lets you put off federal holidays, and so I have all the federal holidays put off. I almost canceled this evening because I was kind of like, well, it's a holiday. How many people are going to show up? And so far, not many. But I'm like, it's a holiday, you know. People probably took a vacation or whatever have you, and I'm like, well, I could always, cancel this evening and everything. But there's a lot of news stories coming out right now. There's a lot of things happening, and which gets into Epstein and Gaza and just everything. So I figured since the week of news was a little slow that last week and everybody was off today, we could use this time to catch up on some of the stories I haven't had a chance to talk about in a while. We'll definitely do that. I want to remind everyone that if you want everything from the Cameron Journal, including the Living Joke, articles, and all that jazz delivered directly to your inbox, you need to sign up for the newsletter, which you can do in one of 2 places. You can go to CameronJournal.com/newsletter, and you can sign up there. We'll bring your information over. Or you can sign up at CameronJournal.substack.com. And you have the newsletter delivered directly to your inbox with all the fun stuff. So, I want to remind on that, make sure to follow me on social media. Links are in the bio wherever you're watching. But it's at Cameron Cowan on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, and it's at Cameron Journal on TikTok. It's Cameron Journal on Blue Sky as well if you're on Blue Sky. So, and I post extra content, threads, if you want articles of my stuff in your feed, shorts from the show, shorts from interviews, all this type of thing. That is the place to, be. So, let's dive into the news, shall we? So let me do that, and let me do that. There we go. And this overlay is for the wrong is the wrong segment and the wrong color for the wrong show. So we're gonna start right in with um, uh, trade deals. So, as we know, Trump has been trying to reset the global course of trade, and he has been trying to reset the system of globalization we have had for about 25 years, since the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, with China's ascension to the WTO after closing out NAFTA and CAFTA. So, obviously, there have been advantages and disadvantages to both systems, but Trump has really tried to overturn the whole chessboard on this, and unfortunately, in the worst, most costly way possible. And there is fallout from it, and one of the big fallout is people learning how to form trade deals without the United States involved. And here is one such case. The EU and a 12-nation Indo-Pacific bloc are opening talks to form one of the largest economic alliances in the world per Politico. Canada's Mark Carney is leading it. Why? Because Trump blew up U.S. credibility with tariffs, chaos, and isolationism. So the world is reorganizing without us. Didn't Trump make America strong? He made America irrelevant. There is, and then of course someone points out, all the deals Canada has been, has been going through, and the way Canada's been reaching out in trade and all this type of thing. And so, yeah, it's it's an interesting dynamic. The Since World War II, as we all know, there has been a very kind of organized way global trade has gone. When we first had the Bretton Woods system, and then the petrodollar system, and then which also became the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff system, that eventually was rolled into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And the World Trade Organization's job was to solve disputes and control the exact thing Trump is doing, which is predatory and penalizing tariffs. Obviously, Trump does not care one little bit about the opinion of the World Trade Organization. I'm surprised no one has told him that we should leave the World Trade Organization or something. But he has set his own way in terms of a policy, and the world is organizing without it. The multipolar trade bloc world of the European Union, the United States, Asia is starting to form in its earliest days, and this means that trade within the trading blocks will be very easy. Trade between them could be quite hard. I saw one thread, I didn't save it off, but someone said reciprocal tariffs. Why were they charging tariffs to protect their markets from us? And I said, well, in the case of the European Union, to protect the integrity of the European Union, as in the case of a lot of other countries, to protect local industry because we are the bigger player, and American companies could come in and drive out local industry in its entirely. We've seen this time and again with Africa, that's why I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying that that was the situation. Bearing in mind the global economic system has made this country very, very rich by being the financial center of the world. And the unfortunate, I think, reality is that we are we are setting ourselves up for a very awkward position where the world is trading and growing and new technologies developing, and we're just on the outside sitting on the outside looking in. And we've been here before as a country. I think we have a natural aversion to too much foreign influence. I think we have a natural aversion to getting too integrated into international systems. I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. It's a mixed bag. It sometimes saves us from a lot of the other stuff people deal with, but it also leaves us on the outside looking in. And I think this is another situation where we're going to be on the outside looking in of a whole new trading system that we previously controlled, ran, and adjusted to our benefit, and we're now going to be sitting on the outside looking in. And the reality is, even if we get a different administration in 3 years, these changes are permanent, basically, and will take decades to change. and decades to undo. And I don't think anybody's really ready to have that conversation yet. So, anyway, we have a lot of stories. Let's move on quickly. um, this kind of starts us into Epstein, Epstein stuff. Yeah, this is all, well, not all Epstein stuff, some Epstein stuff. Today, or yesterday rather, um, oh no, I'm sorry, it was actually on the 14th. Attorney General Pam Bondi released all Epstein files under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, including justified redactions and a list of high-profile names appearing in the documents. And there are multiple names. A lot of people we don't know, some people we do, including Beyonce, although they didn't bother to put that her last name was Knowles or Carter, which they just put Beyonce, which I think is funny. Hunter Biden, although I've not seen any mention of him in the files. Pam Bondi put herself, good job. George W. Bush, George Bush Jr., Richard Branson, Bono. They didn't even put his legal name, they just put Bono. Joe Biden, Melinda Gates, Mark Foley, Sarah Ferguson, Diana, Princess of Wales, made it in here. Mike Huckabee, Sarah Huckabee is in here. Eric Holder's in here. Jay-Z. Didn't put his government name, just Jay-Z. Steny Hoyer, former congressperson. Kamala Harris. We also know who she is. Let's see. Dan Bongino is in here. Jill Biden is in here. Ehud Barak. Alec Baldwin. Miriam Adelson, head of Big Media Empire. Bill Clinton, obviously. George Clooney. Bill Cosby. Who else is in here? That's important. John McCain, Ghislaine Maxwell, Howard Lutnick, Monica Lewinsky, John Kerry, John Kasich, former governor of Ohio, Janis Joplin, the musician, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Carl Klein, Benjamin Netanyahu, Michelle Obama, Mehmet Oz, Kash Patel, Nancy Pelosi, Tony Podesta, Pope John Paul II, Elvis Presley, Dan Quayle, of all people, Mitt Romney, Amy Schumer, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, Bruce Springsteen, George Soros, Ben Shapiro, Marco Rubio, Karl Rove, Ronald Reagan, doesn't matter, he's dead, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, Mike Pompeo, Rosie O'Donnell, Barack Obama. I'm not quite sure why they put Barack Obama next to O'Donnell. It should have been over here with Michelle. This is only somewhat in alphabetical order. Unless they're going left, right, left. I guess maybe going left, right, left, right. And Ro Khanna, Larry Kudlow, Alex Jones. Who else? Susan Rice, Obama official person. Paul Ryan is in here. And J.D. Vance, Ivanka Trump, Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, Abigail Wexner, Les Wexner's in here somewhere, Melania Trump, Stanley Woodward, oh, there's Les Wexner, Donald Trump, of course, and Margaret Thatcher. That's kind of the who's who. They were required to list high-profile names with political exposure. And so, yeah, it's, yeah, there's a whole list here. And obviously, just because your name is mentioned does not mean anything. Jeffrey Epstein liked to email back and forth with his friends about a lot of things. Some of it had to do with, his crimes. A lot of it did not. So just merely having your name in here does not mean anything. It also, a lot of these things could be simply tangentially mentioned in the emails, as well. I'm not quite sure what John Bolton got up to, or Joe Biden got up to, or Bono got up to. Or obviously Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, Noam Chomsky, Cher, even. That does not necessarily mean that they were involved in any crimes. It just means they were mentioned and they're a public person. So I thought that was interesting. Everyone's calling it a who's who of who's famous. I'm like, actually, there's a lot of people that aren't in here. A lot of people. There's very specific people that are in here. It's also very America, Britain sort of thing. Um, and and I think that is interesting. Julian Assange made it in here. Woody Allen. Definitely a list I don't think anyone necessarily wants to be on, and a lot of these people probably wish that they weren't. And obviously, there's a ton of other people who are much less famous who did not make this official list of people, um, people without political exposure, sort of thing. So I wanted to go over kind of that. If you've seen this list floating around, and just kind of go over who all is here. We now have a list of people who are associated some way, somehow, with the Epstein files by mention or whatever have you, even including people like Prince Philip, who's passed, that was Queen Elizabeth's husband. I did read somewhere that Queen Elizabeth herself was in here, but I didn't see. Let's go back to the E's. I didn't see if they put her. Yes, Elizabeth II. There we go. Missed that one. So that yeah, it's a lot of Orrin Hatch, a lot of American political figures, a lot of British political figures. Tony Blair's in here. Obviously British royalty, both former and past. Arthur Edward Rory Guinness, which I thought was rather funny. Bill Barr, former Attorney General under two different administrations. Yeah, so just a very interesting collection of characters. Obviously, these are the ones they're required to release, the people that had political exposure to it. Lots of other people have been tangentially mentioned or directly mentioned, and people are just resigning jobs and things like that. This is so toxic, and rightly so. This is the biggest scandal of our time, and the details of it just get worse and worse and worse. What with the well, I won't mention all those things on YouTube because I don't want this video to go down. But all of the things that you've heard about, all the terrible, awful, inhumane things that you've heard about. Anyway, we'll move on. This was a story I've been trying to get to for a little bit, and I thought was very interesting because it has to do with the Russia thing that turns out, as we now know from the Epstein files, was a lot more than just a hoax. It says here, on October 7th, 2016, an emergency meeting was set by infamous pedophile Jeffrey Epstein with Palantir founder Peter Thiel and Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin. Later that day, the Access Hollywood tape came out, followed by Russian-hacked emails being released on WikiLeaks, which were systematically painted by alt-right online trolls paid by Thiel's PAC, MAGA3X, to mean that Hillary Clinton was involved in child sex trafficking. Mike Flynn and Eric Prince both worked to amplify these false, traumatic narratives about Podesta and a cabal of satanic pedophiles run by Hillary. This was done significantly through Breitbart, which was run by Epstein close friend Steve Bannon, and funded by Rebecca Mercer. Additional firepower for these psychological operations were provided by Wagner chief Evgeny Prigozhin's Internet Research Agency, later charged by Robert Mueller. Up to 600 Russians were dedicated to the 2016 election on Twitter and Facebook. The smearing of Hillary Clinton, which mirrored Epstein and Trump's own documented child rape, was later branded as Pizzagate and extended by QAnon. It was all systemic, large-scale projection designed to swing a presidential election through psychological warfare. Thiel was the only major donor who supported Trump in the wake of Trump's comments about grabbing women by the genitals on video. Palantir had previously been caught planning to run a covert influence operation on WikiLeaks. A month after Trump's inauguration, Vitaly Churkin suddenly died. We were looking for quote-unquote Russian collusion in the wrong place. I don't necessarily know that proves the whole Russian collusion idea, but it does add on. Here's why I like this. It adds on to things we already know are true and have been decided in a court of law. We already know about the Russian influence operation because of Cambridge Analytica. That's where the problem always has been. So this bit about 600 Russians dedicated to the 2016 election on Twitter and Facebook, that we know. And that we know from court. We also know that the Internet Research Agency is part of the FSB from Wagner and Evgeny Prigozhin. That we already know. That's been known for 10 years now. Obviously, if you are a high Russian official, the chances of you falling out of a balcony in Moscow are pretty good. If I were them, I'd start putting up nets, because all these people just seem to start falling out of windows. It's just a terrible thing. I blame the ice. Well, that also in Putin's desire to get rid of people, but ice as well, sort of thing. I think for me the part that is so troubling is how so much of what we have been dealing with over the last several years was the brainchild of a small group of people who were trying to push their own agenda and were doing it through the most nefarious means possible. Um, I know I will have to say one of the things I did not do and I should have done is I should have gone back and reviewed the Podesta emails. It's been too many years since that was 10 years ago almost. Too many years since they came out, so I'm fuzzy on the details. I would to cross check all of this. It would be interesting to go back to the reporting on the Podesta emails at the time and look to see what was being said and why, if there was anything to it. As far as I know, Podesta was never charged with anything. And look through all of that and then go from there to see what's there. But I think it's interesting that based on the list we just read, I didn't see John Podesta's name on it. And interesting enough, nothing ever came of any of that with Podesta under two different presidents. So that's, a thing. But this was a very interesting thing looking at, the emails and these appointments and these, the reporting at the time, and what Palantir wanted to do. I thought this was a very interesting concept because, like I said, it builds on something we already know to be true. And who knew that the Russian influence operation from the 2016 election was tied rather directly to Jeffrey Epstein? I think that is just, it's impressive, I will say. It's quite impressive. I would have never ever thought in a million years that those two things would be linked together in the same way that they are. Anyway, let's move on. This one is very interesting. Mostly because it's in an area of research I used to do. But this one, Donald Trump isn't just trying to rewrite history, he's trying to rewrite reality itself, and the paper trail is damning. Days after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the Trump-controlled Department of Justice quietly deleted a federally funded study showing that far-right extremists are responsible for the overwhelming majority of domestic terrorism deaths in the U.S. I would have been interested to read that because that used to not be true. I did research on this. Anyway, we'll go on. The timing wasn't subtle, the motive wasn't complicated. Trump immediately blamed the, quote, radical left, unquote, for the killing before investigators had identified a suspect or motive, then doubled down in speeches insisting left-wing violence is the real threat. That claim flatly contradicts every serious data set on domestic terrorism, including studies from the DOJ itself, the Libertarian Cato Institute, CSIS, PNAS, and the University of Maryland. So instead of changing the rhetoric, the administration changed the record. This is not messaging, it's state-sponsored narrative laundering. The DOJ offered no real explanation, just a vague notice about reviewing websites to comply with unnamed executive orders. Translation, the facts were inconvenient, so they disappeared. That's a stretch. This is how authoritarianism actually works, not with one dramatic lie, but with quiet deletions, buried data, and an audience told to trust the man yelling loudest of the evidence sitting right in front of them. Trump didn't challenge the conclusions, he removed them. That's not governance, that's reality control. Every presidential administration's done that, though. I mean, it just has. Everybody... One of the first rules of government, especially in democratic society, is you have to control the narrative. If you don't control the narrative, someone else will control it for you. By the way, Democratic National Committee, are you listening about controlling narratives and controlling your brand and controlling how things are framed? Anyway, that's another whole story. But I was hoping to get a look at this study, but the link is not working. This Washington Post graphic I thought was very interesting. And the thing, when I was kind of interested is when I was researching domestic terrorism back in 2011, it was quite obvious that the most active groups, not just in the United States, but around the world, definitely had more left-wing ideology than right-wing ideology. For the simple fact, most right-wing people are trying to reinforce the system and the status quo. That's the definition of being conservative. And so this Washington Post graphic is interesting from 2013 to 2022. This obviously took place after my research completed. We had a domestic Islamist extremist, right-wing extremist, left-wing extremist, and you have incidences, right-wing, Islamic, left-wing, and then killings. It's a pretty dramatic sort of thing. Yes. And this is the announcement from, yes. This is a file from someone's story about it, which makes sense. Yeah, it's yeah, that's an interesting. The Hill has. Oh yes, yeah. Here is the actual story as it was. It's been saved on Scribd by someone. Good job on them. Um, yeah, that is one of the more common conclusions of recent research on radicalization is that no single profile accurately captures the characteristics of the individuals who commit extremist and hate crimes. True. Has been true. Then here's the initial study and sort of thing. So, might go read more about that, do a video about that later on. But I wanted to kind of review this to show how when we don't know something and when data changes, it shifts narrative, it shifts ideas, it shifts what we think about it. And one of the jobs of journalism that is being performed very poorly by the mainstream media is to talk about things like this, to mention things like this. And so, yeah, I need to save this away so I can dig more into it as time goes on. But it was a very interesting thing. I want to review it and do kind of a more in-depth video on where domestic terrorism now. I have long argued, and I did so recently in a new piece, on in my collection, What the Hell is Going On. I talked about how we really needed a domestic surveillance agency to start rooting these things out. That was before Trump won in 2024 when I wrote that. I think we're getting one whether we like it or not, thanks to Palantir. I am still nominally in favor of that, but much like our British, French, and Canadian cousins who have such agencies, there needs to be guardrails, and a lot of them. So, let's move on. Oh, yes, Mr. Tellerico. So, James Tellerico is running for Congress in Texas, and I wanted to watch this video because it's very emblematic of, I think, a lot of the problems with the media and some of the issues that we now have and we now face. So let's just listen in. Here we go.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting. I've been in this race for 5 days, and I've had a lot of interviews with national media. No one's ever asked me about the cost of housing. No one's asked me about the cost of prescription drugs. No one's asked me about the cost of childcare. The only thing the media wants to ask me about are trans athletes. And so what I would say is that the only minority destroying this country is the billionaires. Trans people are 1% of the population. Undocumented people are 1% of the population. Muslims are 1% of the population. We are all focused on the wrong 1%. Trans people aren't taking away our health care. Undocumented people aren't defunding our schools. Muslims aren't cutting taxes for themselves and their rich friends. It's the billionaires and their puppet politicians. And so we need not only the media, but all of us to focus on the real problem at hand. Well,
and now, my dear students of the Cameron Journal Newshour, why does the media only focus on divisive identity politics issues and never the actual real issues? Because, say it with me now, the billionaires own the media. Very good, class. Bravo, bravo. When you have billionaire-controlled media, you get a media who's deeply unserious. And that is one of the problems with journalism in this country. And I'm glad someone like James Tellerico is pointing it out for what it is. Finally, someone saying something. And it is and I have said this since I started this in 2014. It's one of the reasons I started, this show. I've always felt like journalism and media has underserved this country, underserved the population, and it has allowed the corporate takeover of government without hardly a protest being really registered. And the fact that all of this has gone on and the media has not been pounding the same drum, saying the same thing he's talking about all day, every day, for at least the last 25 years, shows us how ineffective modern journalism and modern media is. So if you're sitting here watching this, all two of you, because it's a holiday, if you're sitting here watching this, you are already more informed than the average cable news viewer. So, and this is also why, and I tell people this, I don't watch cable news outside of clips. I don't watch a lot of mainstream media for this exact reason. they're not covering the stories that are really important. But here's the great news about the internet. There's now wonderful independent journalists like myself and Aaron Parnas and Under the Desk News and David Packman and a lot of other people who are actually doing the job the mainstream media should be doing. And I just love this video because Tellerico's telling how it is and taking the media to task for their complicity in what's happened to make our society not function. And it's about time someone says it out loud and actually gets them back to doing what they do best, which is their actual job, rather than just merely being lackeys for the billionaire class. Anyway, enough of that. I'm getting ranty now. I can't do that. All right. This story we probably all forgot about, but I'll bring you up to speed. So Senator Mark Kelly made a video several months ago reminding America's troops that they did not have to follow unlawful orders, and the administration has had a hard-on for him ever since. And it says here now that judge temporarily blocks Hegseth from punishing Kelly for video. Judge Richard J. Leon found that attempts to discipline Mark Kelly for a video that warned against following illegal orders would violate the senator's First Amendment rights. Says here, a federal judge on Thursday temporarily blocked Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth from punishing Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat of Arizona, for participating in a video that warned active duty service members not to follow illegal orders. Judge Richard J. Leon of the District Court for the District of Columbia wrote in a 29-page opinion that the Defense Department's move out to discipline Mr. Kelly, retired Navy captain and former astronaut, ran roughshod over his freedom of speech. Judge Leon barred Mr. Hegseth and the Pentagon from taking any steps to reduce the senator's retirement rank and pay or using the findings against Mr. Kelly in a criminal proceeding. Quote, rather than trying to shrink the First Amendment liberties of retired service members, Secretary Hegseth and his fellow defendants might reflect and be grateful for the wisdom and expertise the retired service members have brought to public discussions and debate on military matters in our nation over the past 250 years, he wrote. If so, they will more fully appreciate why the Founding Fathers made free speech the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The blunt ruling came after a grand jury in Washington rejected an extraordinary attempt by federal prosecutors in Washington to secure a criminal indictment against Mr. Kelly and 5 other Democratic lawmakers who together released a video in November directed at members of the military and intelligence community. Our laws are clear, Mr. Clay said in the video. You can refuse illegal orders. The message enraged President Trump, who accused Democrats of seditious behavior punishable by death. The decision on Thursday came after Mr. Kelly sued Mr. Hegseth and the Defense Department for censuring him and initiating a military review of the senator's public statements that could result in a reduction of his retirement rank and pension. The Justice Department had argued that the video and public statements by Mr. Kelly criticized Mr. Hegseth for firing admirals and generals and surrounding himself with yes men undermined military discipline. But Judge Leon, a nominee of President George W. Bush, wrote that Mr. Kelly was acting within his role as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, exercising oversight authority over the Defense Secretary, and that attempts to penalize him through military channels appeared to be a tactic to skirt review by the courts. So, it's a temporary block. I'm sure this is going to continue on. I'm sure Hegseth and co. are going to appeal. But this story will continue. I thought it was interesting. I like the judge's opinion, so I wanted to read it because it shows it gives some clarity and some ideas of the intersection between what people can say and how that interacts with with the law and other and other things, including First Amendment and all this type of thing. So, it's a very interesting. Like I said, it was a very interesting take. Interestingly enough, what I think is kind of funny about the 5 people in that video, was that the other 5 senators didn't have any real way they could go after them, but Mark Kelly being ex-military, they had a way to do this and go in on all of this, and that I think was a rather very interesting tack they took. I think it also shows that I think they realized it would be very hard to go after the rest of them, all 5 Democrat senators, because the laws around a lot of this stuff are very narrow. The definition of treason is very narrow. The definition of sedition is very narrow. And so they went after Mark Kelly on the one channel that they could, and that was Department of Defense and a military review. And now the judge is temporarily blocked it. We have a comment that disagrees, so we'll talk about it because we always love a good debate. So, um, 100% was sedition. I think it's a very good and easy way to view it that way. Legally speaking, that is not the case. Although, if you remember, on this show, I had called, as I have a lot of ex-military buddies, and I called one of them and I said, "How does the soldier on the ground even understand this esoteric legal foolishness? Like, how is the average soldier to make this decision?" And on illegal orders, it seems, how do you do that sort of thing? Um, and he said, the reality is it has a lot more to do with what happens afterwards than it does like in the moment, in terms of if you get an illegal order and it was wrong, you are not in legal trouble for doing it because the order was illegal. He's like, but it's very hard in the field to make that decision. He was in Iraq in the desert. Sort of thing. And so I was kind of like, we couldn't talk long because I had to do work and he had to do stuff, and I called him like right before the news hour sort of thing. But it was kind of a very odd thing. When it comes to, whether this was seditious behavior or not, I I don't view it that way legally. I don't perceive it that way. I realize that's my own view of things. Um and so obviously how you feel about the context of what that video was made in, and it was after boats had been bombed in the Caribbean without an authorization of Congress for war, didn't really know who a lot of these boats were, sort of thing. One comment is like, and it turned out to be a Russian marked sub. Yes, there were Russian subs in the Caribbean, including the tanker that got turned around and escorted full of oil by a Russian sub. There was also cartel boats and people that drowned and all this sort of thing, and all of this without any authorization from Congress. I would also argue if there's a Russian sub and we're shooting at it, that can cause a war. I would advise care and carefulness. Obviously, and this goes to the other comment of improving intent. Obviously, one of the issues here is you would have to prove the fact that they were trying that video by those senators what had intent to undermine military discipline. I think one of the things the judge here is arguing is that it was free speech in his capacity as a politician. He was acting as a politician, and therefore if they want to sue him under other laws, they're welcome to try, but trying to go after his military rank and pension, which is really all they've got because he's the only one they're going after, would be very difficult. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own opinion on whether that video should or should not have been made. Personally speaking, I think it's a lot of burden to ask the everyday soldier, sailor, airman in the plane, in the boat, on the ground to be making these sorts of sophisticated legal decisions that JAG officers spend time dealing with and that judges in court spend time dealing with. Your average, mortarman, gunman, artillery person is not going to be familiar with such esoteric things. So in that way, it may not have been helpful from the military's perspective, but I think politically it was I think politically it made sense for Mark Kelly to do as a senator. I think that was where the judge was coming from. Um, do you think the media knows better than Pete Hegseth as to where that boat came from? It's not like they just found it randomly. They've been watching it back and forth from Venezuela. Oh no, I have no doubt that those boats were carrying drugs. I'm not, no doubt. All I'm saying is that care should be required. One, because you don't want to be shooting other countries' equipment that might cause a war. And for two, there are actually laws and regulations around how this stuff is supposed to be dealt with in terms of boarding and preserving human life and arresting people, most importantly, and charging them with crimes. It's not a matter of should we be going after drug boats. I think we should. I think it's a matter of process and authorization, which is an important part of a democratic and free society. I don't like the news media trying to pass judgment on things any better or faster than anybody else. And I myself try to avoid doing this myself. Um, uh, but we do have to. I think it is important to follow a structure and a process for a lot of this stuff because it can quickly get out of control. That's, I think, the important thing here. Um, it's oh, this government is good. It's just because they want to control the narrative. It certainly can be perceived that way. Um, Trying to control a narrative and speak out is not legally in that very narrow definition of what sedition is, which I think was covered by the Security Act 1947 a little bit. Um, and so that, yes, like I said, is it necessarily a good thing to burden the military with? No. Did it make political sense in the moment for them to do that? Yes. Um, Good politics does not automatically mean that you've broken the law. And I think that's one of the judge's points here. It's a temporary block. This case will go on. We will find out more. I'm sure the government will continue to appeal and all this type of thing. Two drones versus a battle on the sea that could cost more lives. I mean, yes, I'm not saying let's not go after drug boats and let's not, reduce cartels activity and all this type of thing. I think we should. I think it's important to be careful and have a process. That's what I think is the most important, I think, part of all of this is understanding the process. I think it's definitely something where I don't know um I don't know that I would have necessarily done that video myself or participated myself, but I understood the politics of the moment. So we're getting late and we have a lot of stories to go through, so let's move on quickly, but thank you for commenting. This one is a very important story because it will change the health of everyone listening to this. All three of you. The Trump administration erases the government's power to fight climate change. The Environmental Protection Agency rejected the bedrock scientific finding that greenhouse gases threaten human life and well-being. It means the agency can no longer regulate them. This is great news if you own a factory with smokestacks. President Trump on last Thursday, announced it was erasing the scientific finding that climate change endangers human health and the environment, ending the federal government's legal authority to control the pollution that is dangerously heating the planet. I think that was in the Clean Air Act, by the way. Anyway, the action is a key step in removing limits on carbon dioxide, methane, and 4 other greenhouse gases that scientists say are supercharging heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and other extreme weather. Led by a president who refers to climate change as a hoax, the administration is essentially saying the vast majority of scientists around the world are wrong, and that a hotter planet is not the menace that decades of research shows it to be. It's a rejection letter of the fact that had been accepted for decades by presidents of both parties, including Richard Nixon, whose top advisor warned of the dangers of climate change, and the first President Bush, who signed an international climate treaty. It is a knockout punch in the years-long fight by a small group of conservative activists as well as oil, gas, and coal interests to stop the country from transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards solar, wind, and other non-polluting energy. This is about as big as it gets, President Trump said at the White House as smiling Lee Zeldin, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, stood by. We are officially terminating the so-called endangerment finding, a disastrous Obama-era policy, he said. Mr. Trump called it a radical rule that became the basis for the Green New Scam, a label the president gives to any effort to curb emissions or develop renewable energy. Mr. Zeldin called it the single largest deregulatory action in the history of the United States. He accused Democrats of having launched an ideological crusade on climate change that strangled entire sectors of the United States economy, particularly the auto industry. The administration claimed it would save the auto manufacturers and other businesses an estimated $1 trillion, although it has declined to explain how it's arrived at that estimate. At issue is what's known as the endangerment finding, a 2009 scientific conclusion that greenhouse gas emissions pose a danger to Americans' health and welfare. The finding was based on more than 200 pages of research and evidence. Oh, so it's new. Good. Mr. Trump also has called climate scientists stupid people, claimed on Thursday that the finding had no basis in fact. For nearly 17 years, the EPA had relied on the bedrock finding to justify regulations that limit carbon dioxide, methane, and other pollution from oil and gas wells, tailpipes, smokestacks, and other sources that burn fossil fuels. The repeal of the endangerment finding is expected to increase the country's greenhouse gas emissions by 10% over the next 30 years, according to the Environmental Defense Fund and advocacy group. The added pollution could lead to as many as 58,000 premature deaths and an increase of 37 million asthma attacks between now and 2055. On Fox Business Wednesday, Doug Burgum, the Interior Secretary, revived a debunked myth to sum up how the Trump administration views carbon dioxide, the main greenhouse gas. CO2 is never a pollutant, he said. When we breathe, we emit CO2. Plants need CO2 to survive and grow. They thrive with more CO2. While carbon dioxide can help plants grow, the extraordinary high levels in the atmosphere are overwhelming natural processes and increasing the frequency and severity of drought, heat waves, and other damaging events, according to scientists. President Barack Obama wrote on social media that the repeal of the endangerment finding means, quote, we'll be less safe, less healthy, and less able to fight climate change, so all the fossil fuel industry can make even more money, unquote. Governor Gavin Newsom of California promised a court challenge. Of course, if this reckless decision survives legal challenges, it will lead to more deadly wildfires, more extreme heat deaths, more climate-driven floods and droughts, and greater threats to communities nationwide. He said California will, quote, will sue to challenge this illegal action and will continue to regulate greenhouse gases, he said. We will see them in court, and we will win, said Manish Bapna, the president of the National Resources Defense Council. The science and the law are crystal clear, and EPA is issuing a rushed, sloppy, and unscientific determination that has no legal basis. And it goes on about climate change. As longtime readers and listeners know, I've always been a bit questioning of climate science. In the 10 plus years since I wrote my initial essay on climate change, I've definitely seen more evidence in favor of it than I have against it. But one thing has also become clear. I don't think we fully understand climate systems. They're too big. Because, you know, between 2010 and 2020, we were supposed to see an unprecedented increase in hurricanes. We did not. We're supposed to see increases in severe weather. Some places we have, some places we haven't. There's definitely a lot of questioning around that. But I think overall, just from a public health perspective, reducing emissions is always a good thing. Anytime you can clean that up and deal with that another way is a good thing. And I think this is a loss for enforcing clean air and clean water, and continues a pattern in this administration of not allowing the federal government to regulate these things in favor of industry. If you look at the history of industry in this country, particularly in the 20th century, it is a history of environmental degradation where these things are. I think if we want to reindustrialize and we want to do these things, we have to do it smarter than we did in the past, and not just dump the waste everywhere, not just pollute the air, the rivers, the lakes, the streams, and be mindful of how these things fit into a greater ecosystem. That's not the narrative in climate change. It probably should be, but I think this is not a good thing. So that's some editorialism for you. Moving right along. Speaking of shutdowns, we have a partial government shutdown right now. Senate Democrats have refused to move ahead with the spending bill needed to keep the Department of Homeland Security running because it lacked limits they have demanded on federal immigration agents. I'm not changing graphics fast enough because I'm the only one here, and it's hard for me to produce and speak at the same time. But we'll try to catch up. There we go. All right. It says here, members of Congress departed Washington on Thursday without funding the Department of Homeland Security, putting it on a near certain path to shut down this weekend, amid a deep partisan divide over Democrats' demands to place new restrictions on federal immigration agents. Senate Democrats blocked a spending bill that would have funded the department past a Friday night shutdown deadline without adding any new curbs on immigration enforcement. An expected outcome after bipartisan talks on limiting President Trump's crackdown deadlocked. With the funding deadline less than 36 hours away, Republicans tried to advance a bill that the House approved last month to fund the department through September, which Democrats blocked 2 weeks ago as they insisted on new measures to rein in federal immigration agents. As expected, the proposal, which contained modest guardrails far short of Democrats' demands, failed to draw the 60 votes necessary to overcome a filibuster, though it was 52 to 47 with nearly all Democrats opposed. As they prepared to block the legislation, Democrats said that Thursday's announcement by Tom Homan, the border czar, that the administration would pull immigration agents from Minnesota and end its crackdown there was not sufficient to get them to back down on their demands. Quote, abuses cannot be solved merely through executive fiat alone, unquote, said Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York and the minority leader. Without legislation, what Tom Homan says today could be reversed tomorrow on a whim from Donald Trump. With Democrats and Republicans still far apart on their demands and little progress showed from days of negotiations, the House and the Senate both dismissed lawmakers who are scheduled for a week-long recess, all but guaranteeing a shutdown of the Homeland Security Department. And it's Monday, so you'll guess what happened. Should funding lapse on Saturday morning, it would be the third time in 5 months that parts of the government would have come to a halt because of congressional standoff. Given the scheduled recess, the shutdown would last at least through the week, although leaders advised their rank and file to be ready to return to Washington at the event of a deal that still appeared far off. Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, and the majority leader pushed for another stopgap bill that would keep funds flowing. Mr. Thune said on Thursday that Democrats should support interim funding since the administration has submitted a, quote, reasonable good faith offer, unquote, for guardrails and immigration enforcement, and he pointed to the announcement by Mr. Homan. Quote, maybe there's some more ground the White House could give on a couple of fronts, Mr. Thune said. I don't know, but I think right now at least there ought to be an understanding that these discussions need to continue and that a solution is at least in sight, and we ought to keep the government open. But Democrats assume they will not even allow a temporary funding measure to proceed without measures to curb the tactics of federal agents carrying out the Trump administration's deportation campaign. Just one of them, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, voted with Republicans in favor of the spending measure on Thursday. And it goes on to some other details and all this type of thing, and we don't need to read all that right now. But, so the Department of Homeland Security is rather shut down right now over ICE funding. This is one where, for people that want to see government functioning and never a shutdown, all this type of thing, this obviously is a, not a great moment. It's great politics for Democrats right now. It does not mean it makes for a functioning government or a society, but it makes for good politics. These things are often not coterminous. And I understand why they are doing it in the wake of recent events. I don't necessarily know that this hill is the one to die on right now. I think it's something where with Tom Homan saying they're pulling out of Minneapolis and Minnesota and all this type of thing, it seems to me you could deliver this funding as a good faith way of saying, we've got this shutdown here. We have some guardrails sort of thing and going on, but obviously the Democrats are trying to do much more than that and have many more curbs on what is happening. So yeah, like I said, bad policy, good politics. In our next story, this is the Gaza stuff. And we 110% need to talk about it because it's kind of fallen off the news radar. And it shouldn't. And we'll probably stop here and get to some of the other stories later. Let's listen to Senator Sanders for a moment because he'll say it faster than I can read it to you. Here we go.
Senator Van Hollen said that he worries that the meeting today indicates that the Trump administration is sort of coming around on, or at least not going to enforce any parameters to stop the annexation of the West Bank by Israel. I want to know your thoughts.
Well, obviously, I think everybody knows that the intention of a good part of the Israeli government is to, in fact, annex the West Bank.
Yeah.
And do away with any hope for a two-state solution.
Yeah.
So do I share that concern? Absolutely, I do.
And with regards to Laca Cordia, you signed on to that letter to say she needs to be released from ICE detention. What type of precedent does that set when an American resident is taken into detention for protesting Palestine?
Look, we have a government today under Trump that is moving us into an authoritarian society. A government that does not respect the Constitution or the rule of law. And the American people have got to fight back and say, yeah, we can have our disagreements. That's democracy, but we are going to obey the Constitution and the rule of law.
So, the story here, obviously, is that Israel has been taking more and more land in the West Bank over the last several years. Most Palestinian areas are almost gone. There's tiny pockets throughout. The annexation is almost complete, and Israel, with their new laws, will basically complete the annexation of the West Bank to make sure there's no land for a two-state solution to ever happen. Which also gets into, is it the next tab? It is. Bridge that over to the United Arab Emirates is taking on Gaza's civilian system in a plan backed by Israel and coordinated with the United States. According to officials familiar with the talks, Abu Dhabi has proposed assuming full responsibility for Gaza's civilian management, backed by a multi-billion-dollar investment. Negotiations in recent days have included the exchange of draft agreements among the three parties. Under the plan, the UAE would oversee all markets and trade in Gaza, deploy armed security forces to protect logistics centers across the territory, and operate alongside American private security firms. All goods entering Gaza would be purchased from Israel, with Israeli contractors hired for implementation. Existing distribution points would be transformed into centralized logistics hubs feeding Gaza's private sector. Senior Israeli officials described this proposal as a comprehensive Emirati takeover of civilian responsibility, saying the UAE is prepared to enter Gaza at full scale and act as the territory's civilian sponsor. So, what is, you have two things happening here. You have the first story, which is the completion of the annexation of the West Bank. You now have the UAE saying, well, we'll run Gaza for you while we figure everything out. And with buying everything from Israel and using Israeli contractors for implementation, you basically now have a soft annexation of Gaza. One could argue, and I will make the argument right now, and then we'll talk about the horrors of Gaza, this amounts to an annexation by proxy. This amounts to a soft annexation of Gaza, in so much as the West Bank is a hard annexation. The annexation of Gaza is a soft one, because now if Israel is running everything with the UAE kind of nominally footing the bill, and paying for some of the security and all this type of thing, it amounts to nothing more than a soft annexation of Gaza. Which means their plan to turn Gaza into the Monaco of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Macau of the Mediterranean, if you will, makes it almost nearly complete. And that is a very sad turning point for Palestinians. They have almost been fully displaced now. It's taken almost 80 years, but the full displacement of the Palestinian people is nearly complete. And that's a very sad moment for Palestinians who happen to live in the wrong land at the wrong time. Speaking of that, Reuters has confirmed in early 2024, U.S. diplomats blocked internal cables describing northern Gaza as, quote, apocalyptic wasteland. The reports included harrowing details: human bones scattered in the streets, bodies left abandoned in cars, and a total collapse of access to food, clean water, and medical aid. These cables were not speculation. They were based on first-hand field observations from UN agencies and humanitarian workers on the ground. So why were they blocked? Because they were considered too graphic, lacked balance, and might make Israel look bad. Senior officials at the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, including Ambassador Jack Lew and Deputy Chief Stephanie Hallett, stopped the reports from reaching higher levels of the U.S. government. They feared the cables would contradict the administration's public narrative and disrupt ongoing political cover for Israel's actions in Gaza. According to former officials, humanitarian experts were sidelined, ignored, and outright dismissed. Inside meetings, the question from officials was not how to respond to starvation, but reportedly, where are all the skinny kids? This was not merely policy misjudgment, but a complicity on a grand scale. The Biden administration had access to concrete evidence of mass death, starvation, and social collapse, and instead of sounding the alarm, it chose to suppress the truth and preserve its political position. They did not just ignore the warnings, they buried them. And it mentions there's a Reuters story on the person who wrote it. Regardless of the who, and this is not great on behalf of the Biden administration, by the way. Regardless of the who, the why, and the where, it's very clear that they were trying to block further outrage about what was happening in Gaza, which was outrageous enough just from what we were getting from the ground via live streams and other things like that. This is again another situation where when you try to protect the narrative, it always comes back to bite you in the ass. And the fact that things were so bad on the ground that diplomats felt like they needed to protect, upper levels of government to protect the narrative is just as bad. And the fact that it was happening under Democrat doesn't matter. It's just as bad either which way. However, again, if we had a functioning media, this would have come out anyway. We wouldn't have needed to wait on government cables to confirm it. We would have had people on the ground talking about it. And to some degree we did, because people were live streaming. It was on social media. That was part of the outrage and why people were calling on the Biden administration to stop it, do something, don't enable it. And as we later found out, not only did that, consideration never really ever happen, the Biden administration never considered it, and they never called Tel Aviv to tell them to stop. They kept on going with it, and now we know behind the scenes when things were getting bad, rather than let people know and at least pick up the phone to call Tel Aviv to stop, the Biden administration let the tragedy continue and continue and continue and continue. And that is a tragedy of the first degree for the Palestinian people. It shows the complicity that our government, regardless of party, has with the government of Israel. And I think most importantly, it shows why we need a functioning media and journalism system, and we do not have it. If one of these days I should become wealthy and I have a news gathering organization, we'll gather all sorts of news. We'll be all over things. But in the meanwhile, this is a sad moment for us all, and a sad state that the narrative was more important than anything else. So I'm going to stop there because it's a holiday and I'm tired. We have more stories, but I will cover them in the newsletter or cover them next week or whatever have you. So thank you for all the great discussion tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming by. I want to let everybody know, make sure to sign up for the newsletter, CameronJournal.substack.com. Make sure to catch me on social where you can see clips from me, from The Living Joke, all this type of thing. Follow me wherever you're watching me right now. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. I will see you on Wednesday. Will and Connor will be here to talk about all sorts of stuff on The Living Joke on Wednesday at 4. And then I'll be back here on Monday at 7. This week we have a couple of great interviews for you. We have right now out, we have Art as Activism in the Age of Trump with David Dayton. We have David Pasqualone from Remarkable People talking about the lives of extraordinary achievers. And today we also have The Last American Editor by Ken Tingley. Later this week, we're also going to talk about, with Barry Ma, we're going to talk about his new book, The Great Dick and the Dysfunctional Demon, and go from there. So it's fun times. We have a great week of content for you. So I will see you next Monday, everyone. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye now.